letting us be here and crash Sunday school. Is that all right? So I've met a handful of y'all, but my name is Kolin Hendrix. This is my wife, Callie, here. And then we have 2 children that way on property somewhere. Yeah. Hadley's 4 and Bo is 2. If you're here after the main service, I'm sure you'll be attacked by my daughter with prayer cards. She's in love with doing that, so be prepared for that. But thank you so much for having us. We're excited about being here. We love Arizona. We love Arizona. It's a good place. It's very, very dry, like our home in Lubbock, and so we appreciate that and a lot of other things as well, but we love it here. So we are called to go to England, and we're excited about it. But I want to share a little bit of our testimony and how we kind of came to this point today, and then tell you a little bit about England. During that time, please think of questions, and if you have a question, just raise your hand, okay? Deal? Amen. Okay, so we'll see if you follow instructions, though. So so I went to Bible college in Oklahoma City at Heartland, and the Lord, I was pretty much a carnal Christian. I'll just be you'll find out today. I'm a really transparent person. So I was really carnal as a teenager, just rebellious. Went to Bible college, and it was culture shock. I'd never met anybody that was as serious about serving the Lord as some of the people I met there, except for like my pastor and, people in your church. But when you're a kid, you don't look at those people like, one day I might be like you. You look at him like, that's my pastor. He's been old forever. And I love Brother Don, but he has. And so, but, in Bible college, the Lord really used that time just to really just reset my life. It was kind of a really, really big growing period for me. And so when I got there, I didn't know anything about really the independent Baptist culture and things like that. I grew up in an independent Baptist church, but it wasn't your typical independent Baptist church, and that's a long story in itself. But got to Heartland, and it was just a huge culture shock. I mean, it was just wild. It really was. And so the Lord really used that time just to grow me. I'd never heard preaching like I heard there. I'd never really taken the things of God seriously. And so as I took those steps to become an actual disciple and actually following the Lord and trying to just do what He wanted me to do, the Lord began to grow me step by step. It wasn't always fun. It definitely wasn't always easy. But the Lord used that time in Bible college to grow me. And my first year was a ton of growth. And then they took a risk, and they asked me to be on one of the singing groups. I went from a ridiculous person to a little bit less ridiculous, and now representing the school all around the country. And so I started to travel with one of the singing groups, and the Lord really used that time to just grow me some more. And that summer, He really humbled me in a lot of different ways. And so all of that to say, I got to my 3rd year, and I met my wonderful wife. That wasn't just a friend now, but I was pursuing. And so she and we started to date that year, got engaged, and after we graduated from Bible college, after our senior year, the day after graduation, I went on staff as the youth and music director at Bethany Baptist Church in Lubbock. I met my pastor while traveling on one of those singing groups, and so during that time, so then we went on staff, and during that 6.5 years, you never stop growing, and sometimes you think you've arrived, and then the Lord shows you haven't, and that happened a lot. But the Lord took that time while I was on staff to grow us as a married couple, as a family. We started to have children, and also in our own walks with God, but also as ministers and people that were leading people spiritually. And so during that 6 years, the Lord, in spite of me, grew the youth department and grew the music ministry. I remember maybe 2 months into being the youth director and the music director there, your pastor and the group that he would sing with came through for an anniversary service. And it's like 4 guys that know how to actually sing, and we're standing in the sound booth, and we're all talking about something, and I'm standing there, and I'm like, what am I doing here? And you guys should be taking care of all this. And they're all gracious in the blessing, and they were like, oh, you're okay, man. They all knew I wasn't, but and so but it was a good time. The Lord really used things like that just to grow me and grow us. And so all of that, the youth department, dealing with teenagers, telling them where to wear deodorant, things like that, taking over the music ministry. And that was a humbling experience, because I took over a music ministry at an established church that had musicians at the piano that had been playing the piano at a church longer than I had been alive, and I was having to lead them. And so I learned a lot from them. I think they may have learned a little bit from me, but it was a time of just growth, but also the Lord allowed us to be used while there. During my time there, I took over being the missions director, which is a fancy word for, and I was the missions guy. I wasn't even the missions director because it was just something I had to do. And so it was the logistics side of missions for a church. And so I made sure missionaries got their support. I made sure that they were communicating with us, and I communicated needs, all of those things, tried to stay in contact with them. And the Lord used that time to really soften my heart toward missions and broaden my scope toward the need of the world. Because, when you live in West Texas, you can take some serious pride in West Texas, because I say this in the most loving way I can. West Texas is the best part of the best state in the best country in the world. And so it's pretty much the best place on earth. And so I really, you can be there and you can kind of put the blinders on to the world. You really can, because it's a great place. Most people claim to be saved. Most of the time when you have to lead someone to the Lord, you have to convince them you're not saved before they realize they need to be saved. And so, that was just where we were at, and we loved it. We loved it, loved it, loved it. But the Lord began through missions conferences and taking over the missions stuff at the church to soften my heart and broaden our scope toward the need of the world. And so I was touching missionary letters every day. I was reading them. I was passing them on to people that needed to get them. And so when you see the need at all times, every single day at work in the office, the Lord just starts to work on you. He really does. And so He used that time to really soften my heart towards that. And I think it was 2019, or early 2020, in like January, February, where my wife and I were sitting on our couch, and this is the unspiritual part of my story, which you've realized it's pretty much all unspiritual, but this part is really, we're sitting on our couch and we're watching the Great British Baking Show on Netflix. And every time, and now there's millions of people all around the world that watch this show. I'm sure someone in here watches it. I know my wife does. And so, there's millions of people all around the world that watch this show. And every time they show them in the kitchen baking, and then they show them at home, in American shows, what do? They show themselves having this happy family fancy party that they never do. But in England, they show their dog, their cat, or their yard. And that's like what they do. That's what they show. And in my mind, I paused it, and I was like, babe, I looked at Callie, I was like, who do we know going to England? Because these people obviously have no true purpose in their life. And I wasn't trying to be mean. I really wasn't. It was just like, man, what is going on? Like, this is wild. And so I told her that day, I was like, babe, we need to start praying for these people. And so we started to pray. I set an alarm or a reminder on my phone for 4:45 every day. So when I drove home, I prayed for someone to go to England. And through time in prayer, the Lord began to soften my heart for the people of England. And so I was praying for someone to go to England and someone to go to London. And then I started pouring over research to find out who was there. And I've met one missionary while I was in college. His name's Willie Gossmeyer. And then I went to college for a short stint with Riley Barrett. And so I started to just pour over their letters, and then I started to research who was there, who they were connected with, and I was Google searching all types of missionaries, trying to read their letters, trying to figure out how long they'd been there, what they were doing, all of those things. And then also, I was pouring over research over the country of England and what religions were represented there, and what the need was, and really what all of it was. And so the Lord used Netflix. That's really what it was, to soften our heart toward it. And this is a 2-year process, we said that, and then 2 years later, after praying for 2 years and asking the Lord and really asking Him to make it clear, the Lord, through specific events that we could go through, but there's not really time for that, but that He used to make it clear that it was time to move on from being the youth and the music director there at Bethany. And can I tell you, there was really no point There was really no point in us leaving. If you look at it from a worldly wisdom side, we were successful. We were well taken care of. We had owned a home in Lubbock. My wife says we owned a home. We had a cute SUV and a dog. Now, our SUV is not cute anymore. It's gone a lot of miles with children in it, and we no longer have our dog. He lives at Nana's house, and we're thankful for that. And so we just had the almost like the picturesque American Christian life. That's what it was. But the Lord saw fit to begin to stir and move within our own personal walks with the Lord, and just day by day trying to follow Him and obey Him step by step. And He used that to really make it clear it was time to move. And so we told the church, I talked to my pastor about it the summer of 2021. Sorry, I lose track of my years a lot. So 2021, and then we were praying about it with him for a few months, and then we told the church in October that's what God wanted us to do. February of 2022, on Valentine's Day, I took my wife and 2 children to England for a 6-week survey trip. And during that time, leading up to our survey trip, we asked the Lord, ignorantly, but it was what we needed for a real-life experience. And we got it. During our time in England, my wife is severely allergic to cats, and so we stayed in the house with a cat, and she used an inhaler overnight like 50 times, which you're not supposed to do, apparently. And so she was puffing on an inhaler all night long. We had to travel around with a nebulizer. We all got COVID. All public transit got canceled because of a countrywide storm of over 100-mile-per-hour winds, and we were supposed to travel across the country. And so, that happened. Bo, our youngest, he was 5 or 6 months old at that time, and he had to go to the emergency room. And we got to London, our first day in London by ourselves. It was pouring, cats and dogs, and all of the subway stations workers had gone on strike. And so everyone underground came above ground, and there was this much water on the sidewalks, and we had suitcases and kids and a half mile to walk. And so we had a real life experience, but the Lord really used that because this is what we wanted. We didn't want it to be like a European vacation. You know what I mean? You can go to Europe for 6 weeks and enjoy every bit of it, but then when you get to the field, a mission field, and something goes wrong, we didn't want that. We wanted it to be a real life experience. And so we look back on our survey trip and we don't go, man, that went perfectly, but we do say this: we know God wants us there, even though it didn't go very smooth. And so, and those are all issues that at a first world country, type of issues, but the Lord really used that to just soften our hearts even more. And we already knew God had called us. I told Callie, I said, we're not going to tell the church, our church family, until we know God's called us, because I don't want to say this is a maybe, you know what I mean? And so we knew before we went, but when we went on our survey trip, the Lord just even confirmed it even more. And so now we've been on deputation since August of last year, so about 14 months. We've raised about 70% of the needed support that to be able to live there and get there, and we're very excited about that. England is a very small country. It's 1/8 the size of Texas. I compare a lot of things to Texas, so I'm sorry. So 1/8 the size of Texas, but it has double the amount of people as Texas. So if you can imagine 60 million people crammed into the panhandle of Texas, really. I mean, it's so small with so many people. And people migrate there from all around the world, and it's very different than Texas and America itself. And so, it's funny. People are always like, man, you're going to really struggle with language school. And you know what? I probably will, because I'm a Texan and they don't speak Texan there. And so, but yeah, the Lord's really just, helped us just to try to settle into a lot of those things. And obviously we haven't lived there yet, but I drink hot tea now. Yeah, I know. I'm pretty much British, so... So it's a very small country with a lot of people. We feel like God's called us to plant churches in London. You'll see that in our video. London is a gigantic city in the southeast part of the country, and Every corner of the globe is represented in London. You can walk for blocks on blocks on blocks and hardly hear a person speaking English. It's an amazing place. It really is. It's kind of like New York City, but in my opinion, a little bit better because they're nicer. If anyone's from New York City, I'm sorry. But every time I've been there, I've been yelled at, I've been pushed, I've been elbowed. And maybe that's because I was a teenager, but hey, I was there and they were not nice to me. And so, but when we were in London, we spent about 3 weeks of our trip there in London. Every single time we'd go into a tube station, the subway station, we'd go down the stairs or up the stairs. We had 2 strollers. And every single time almost, someone would look at my wife and say, let me help you with your pram. Let me help you with your stroller. Some random stranger would help her carry it up the stairs or down the stairs. And that's just the British overtone culture of London. London has its own culture. You know, if you ask someone from New York State, oh, so you're from the city, they'll be like, whoa, that's not New York. I'm from upstate New York, you know what I mean? And so and if you ask someone from Texas and you say, oh, so you're from Austin, that's almost offensive, you know what I mean? And so, or, you know, my wife's from Washington State, and so if someone says, oh, I'm from Washington State, they'll be like, oh, Seattle, and if they're from the east side of Washington, they're offended by that because, you know, a lot of times the big city doesn't represent the state, and that's how it is in England. The big city doesn't represent maybe the culture and the overtones of the entire country, but London has an overtone of British, but also it's a melting pot, and so it has its own Londoner culture. And God has begun to soften hearts toward the gospel. If you've heard about the Barretts, you know, they just led their, I think, is it Taekwondo that they do? Yeah, their Taekwondo instructor to the Lord. Another church there in Devon, in a city called Plymouth. Another lady just got saved. And there's a lot of things going on in England where it seems like the Lord is really beginning to go before people and soften their hearts and draw them to himself. We know that's true, but it seems like people are really softening towards the gospel. So it's super exciting to us that we're going to go, and we're praying that we see people saved. I'd love to take some questions because it helps me know what you want to know. So who's got one? It's weird if my wife asks one. So, yes, sir. So I was called to preach at a youth camp when I was 16. When I was 16, I was a rebellious punk. I'm just transparent. And so I knew that God called me when I was at youth camp, but I kind of did the typical youth camp. I was excited about it, and then a few weeks later, it just kind of fell off. But for whatever reason, and I think it's because my mom was praying, I'll be honest with you. But for whatever reason, when I turned 18, I really didn't know what to do. I thought about the military, I thought about being a firefighter, I thought about a lot of things. But I really, for some reason, was like, I think I need to go do whatever people do to go be a preacher. So I asked my pastor, and he said, why don't you go visit Heartland in Oklahoma City? I went on spring break, I came back, I had read the rule book, I threw the rule book in the trash, and I said, I'm not going there. And so my mom began to pray more, and when I turned 18, I applied to every Baptist college I could find, wherever those would be, if they had Baptist in the name, and I applied to Heartland. And for whatever reason, I went to Heartland. I mean, honestly, I think it's just because my mom was praying. So the Lord, through my mom's prayers, I would say, for sure. Yeah. Yes, sir. Anybody?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Can you kind of talk about the difference that we were talking about yesterday?
Yeah.
In like relational
Yeah.
ministry there, and then briefly with the immigration visa type.
Absolutely.
How that affects your ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about evangelism first. So from what I understand and from what I've seen, evangelism is very different than maybe your typical American one. You know, a lot of guys, you know, they talk about, you know, we just go knock on a door and we talk to people at the front door. And I think that's changing even in American culture. If someone knocks on my door, I'm like, why are you here? I have a video camera, and I'm like, go away, and then I hang up. You know what I mean? I know it's very Christian of me. And so, but that's how I am. And so you know, a lot of times people are like, well, you just go knock doors and you just talk to people that'll talk to you and things like that. But in England, I said, so what if you knocked on a door? I asked some missionaries, and they were like, they'd probably call the cops on you. And so evangelism is very relational, and it's for multiple reasons. Number one, because, yeah, if you knock on the door, they're likely just not going to answer. And then second, is this: their history is so much longer than American history. It's affected the way that they think. You know, our country's been around 250 years. You can walk into a house that's double that easily in England. And so their mindset is very much slower to make decisions. They're going to mull over things a lot longer. They're going to think on things a lot longer. And they're very private people. So if you knock on a door, and I'm not saying it's impossible. Obviously, the Lord can lead you wherever you need to go. But from what I've seen that is effective is they're very private. And so they're not going to open up about their need for a Savior, their need for, sin being forgiven with someone they don't know. They've got and I've said this for a long time, and this is how it was with teenagers, is you don't have influence without relationship. Isn't that true for any of us? I mean, if you have a boss that you have a kind of a good relationship with, and they're like, hey, I think you need to improve this, this, and this, you're going to be like, oh, okay, cool. But if you have a boss that all he does is yell at you and berate you, and he's like, I think you need to fix this, this, and this, you're just going to blow him off and roll with it, right? And so with what it seems like with the British people is that you have to build that relationship up to where they have enough trust to open up slowly but surely, layer by layer by layer. With that said, the visa laws changed about 6-7 months ago now, I guess. I don't know, it's November, so yeah, April. And the way that you get into the country is you go under a sponsorship. Someone in country has to sponsor you into the country. And so we had a sponsor that pretty much sponsored every independent Baptist going into the country that we were going to talk to when the time came around. But the government had a meeting with them, the immigration office, and they pulled their sponsorship. And so there was about 17 missionary families that were still under the sponsorship umbrella for these families and for that sponsor. But when they got that pulled, they said as soon as you receive your letter, you have 60 days to get out of the country or find a new sponsor. And so they had this video call with an immigration lawyer, and they said, look, I'm going to push this off for some time for y'all to have enough time to figure out what you're going to do and who's the new sponsor that's going to happen to get their sponsorship. And so we, on our survey trip, had talked to the Gossmeyers about working with them. And I really didn't understand why, because they're in Cornwall. Cornwall's a very rural place. It's very, very different than London. If you went to someone that was Cornish, they don't even say they're English. They say they're Cornish. They're like Texans, They don't say they're American. They say they're Texan. And so, if you went to someone that's Cornish and you said, hey, so are you from London? They'd be like, get out of my face. So it's very, very, very different. And I didn't know why the Lord led us there. And I really kind of struggled with it. But I felt like that's what God wanted us to do. So I talked to Brother Gossmeyer in February of this year and just confirmed it. I said, hey, are we still good? Can I work with you? He's like, yeah, absolutely. And then April rolled around and the sponsorship went bye-bye, for lack of a better term. And so Brother Gossmeyer, because the Barretts were working with the Gossmeyers, what your pastor said, this jumped on the grenade of what needed to happen. And so he started to take the steps. He talked to an immigration lawyer named Nikki, who is going to be a really good friend of mine, hopefully in the next 6 or 7 months. And she started to help him fill out the paperwork and pay the fees and do all the steps that he needed to do to be able to sponsor people into the country. And so he got Riley settled. And there was another family sent out of the church that Brother Gossmeyer sent out of in Oklahoma City, and he just pulled them in through his sponsorship. And we had talked to him, and he said, yeah, you're good to go. Well, you'll be the next ones that we sponsor in. And that's just the Lord, in my opinion, just connecting us with the Gossmeyers, but also leading us to work with them. Like I said, I had no idea why we would be working in Cornwall when we wanted to be in London. But that's what the Lord led us to, and come to find out it's because we don't know anybody else that's pursued getting their sponsorship. And so now when the immigration laws, they updated them, and now you have to work with your sponsor until you're a permanent resident. And permanent residency, or your indefinite leave to remain, your ILR, happens after 5 years. So you have to be in country for 5 years and not leave for more than 6 months. And so we'll be working in Cornwall, and I talked to Brother Gossmeyer just recently, and we're going to be starting new works in the area, because if you pulled up a map of England, threw a dart at it, that place probably needs a gospel preaching church. And so we're going to be doing that in the Cornwall area, and we're very excited about it. We love Cornwall. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Tons of movies are shot there, so I mean it's really fun to be there, but it just wasn't London. But the Lord really led us to that, and we're thankful for that. Maybe time for one more short one.
So, kind of what's your thoughts on, the working on the relationship piece? How are you going to get into communities
Yeah, absolutely.
and do that?
That's a great question. So, I've been really praying about it and thinking about, okay, what are we going to do to build relationships, especially try to build them fast, because if you go to West Texas and you meet my mom and you say, hey, Colin's mom, tell me about your life, she's going to tell you about our entire family and my uncle that's in prison. You don't want to know about it, but she's going to tell you. And so that's just how West Texas works. But in England, it doesn't work that way. And so I've been really trying to research, and think on and pray on what the Lord would have us do. And I've observed what other people are doing. And one thing that I really feel like the Lord has led me to try to pursue is CrossFit. If you've ever met somebody that does CrossFit, they talk about their CrossFit community like better than they talk about their own children. You know what I mean? I mean, they love it. It's like a family unit. They're all there. They text each other when they don't arrive. I mean, there's a lot of things that are binding to that. And so I've done some research on English CrossFit just to see if it's the same way, because it could be completely different. But from what I understand, and from another missionary family that does it, it's the same way. It's almost instant community. You're in. It doesn't matter that you sound like a Texan. And so that's one thing that I'm going to pursue is CrossFit. I know I don't look like a CrossFitter right now. I look like I drive in a car all the time and eat donuts, but that's what I do. And so so that's one thing that I'm going to get into that, and try to be in there and be in the same place every single day. My wife, she likes to paint and she likes to do pottery and she likes to run. And so there's a place there in Cornwall that does the painting and does pottery type stuff. And then also there's mom groups on Facebook and all these things that you can be a part of. Also have our kids involved in, sports. My son, if you have a ball and you throw it to him, even if you don't have a ball, he's going to act like he hits it. And so he loves sports. My daughter, she's just has a huge personality. So we're going to be getting them involved in things like that. We're going to be home educating. And so with that, we'll be doing co-ops. We'll be meeting other families, be connecting with them in that way. Really just trying to be in the same places all the time, and just being connected and meeting people and building those relationships that way. And if you've had your kids involved in sports, you connect with those other families that have their kids involved in sports, and you connect, all types of ways. And so that's our plan right now. We weren't ever planning to go to England, so it could completely change. But that's what we are looking forward to at the moment. I hope that answered your question. If you have any other ones, I can take them while we're in there. Thank y'all for your time. Thanks for listening so well, Pastor.